The heavy doors of Buckingham Palace groaned shut behind the sovereign as the king's private meeting with the Privy Council concluded. King Charles III's jaw was clenched, his eyes shadowed by the gravity of what had transpired. The Invictus Games Prince Harry's once lauded project for wounded veterans had become a wedge, driving deeper into the heart of a royal rift that refused to heal. But this time, things were different. This wasn't just another tabloid scandal or a memoir. This was about loyalty, influence, and the crumbling legacy of a fractured monarchy. A storm was gathering, and at its center stood Prince Harry, still clinging to the memory of honor, waving the flag of the Invictus Games while defying the very crown that gave it legitimacy. What was once a source of familial pride had transformed into a battlefield, and the king had had enough. In an emergency closed-door session with senior royal aides and family members including Princess Anne, the Duke of Edinburgh, and a quietly furious Prince William, King Charles delivered an ultimatum that stunned the room. No member of the royal family, extended or working, shall attend, promote, support, or acknowledge this year's Invictus Games, the king declared, his voice steely. Any association will be considered an act of rebellion, and rebellion has consequences. Silence fell. The threat was unspoken but understood. Exile, the kind that stripped titles, severed royal support, and left even the highest born with little more than their coats and scandals. The decision sent tremors through the House of Windsor. Only days earlier, Prince Harry had sent out personal invitations to key royals and global dignitaries, including Princess Beatrice, Zara Tindall, and even Lord Frederick Windsor. His message had been bold, intimate, and unapologetic. Despite everything, it read, Invictus remains a beacon. I hope you'll stand beside the veterans, not the politics. But the line between compassion and confrontation had grown. Razor-thin. Back in California, Harry paced the Montecito estate like a soldier before battle. Meghan watched from the veranda, her expression unreadable. He'd been confident they'd come, at least Beatrice, maybe even Zara. He clung to hope like a drowning man. But then the calls stopped. First, an apologetic voicemail from you, citing scheduled conflicts. Then Zara's assistant offered a cold, generic email reply. The final blow came in the form of a sealed letter from Clarence House. It wasn't addressed to Harry, it was addressed to everyone else. The letter, printed on cream-colored royal parchment, bore the king's seal. It was distributed quietly, but effectively. By order of His Majesty the King, it is hereby declared that participation in, or public endorsement of the upcoming Invictus Games, organized independently by the Duke of Sussex, shall not be recognized by the Crown, nor supported by any royal household. Any divergence from this instruction shall be treated as a breach of duty and an abdication of allegiance to the monarchy. The message was clear. Anyone who crossed the king would find themselves cast out. Even longtime Invictus patrons like General Sir Nicholas Carter were pressured behind the scenes. If they wanted future honors, future influence, they had to step back, and many did. This is petty, Charles. This is sabotage, he snapped, slamming her phone down as headlines lit up. Royal family turns back on Invictus, King declares. Harry's games not sanctioned. Exile threat looms over royals backing Harry. Palace Cold War escalates. Charles draws the line, but Harry's reaction was different. It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. He had created the games out of pain, out of brotherhood with wounded warriors who had lost everything. Now, he was being painted as a rogue, Prince using it as a political weapon. Was he? The question haunted him, but he pressed on. He released a public video, speaking directly to veterans and supporters. Invictus was never about royalty, it was about resilience, about community. I don't care who's trying to claim ownership of that spirit. The games will go on. The crowd online cheered him on. But inside Britain, the gears of the monarchy ground forward with ruthless efficiency. The Princess Royal, known for her no-nonsense discipline and deep commitment to military service, stunned reporters when she appeared at a veterans event wearing her ceremonial medals but pointedly avoiding any mention of Invictus. When asked directly whether she supported the games, she replied with frosty precision, I support the crown. My commitments remain unchanged. It was a dagger cloaked in diplomacy, and Harry felt it. Anne, once a quiet advocate for Invictus and a moral compass in the family, had chosen sides, but she wasn't finished. In a private conversation with King Charles later leaked to the press, she was heard saying, Harry has weaponized compassion, and it's working. That makes him dangerous. Prince William, now increasingly seen as the public face of the monarchy, said nothing publicly, but privately, his strategy was unrelenting. He reportedly instructed aides to redirect all charitable, military engagements under the Royal Foundation to alternative projects, ensuring that the Crown's support for veterans didn't disappear, it just moved. And in a shrewd move, he invited wounded veterans for a private tour of Windsor and a dinner hosted by Catherine. The message, the real support, still lived within the palace walls. Several Invictus athletes quietly accepted William's invitation. Some even withdrew from Harry's games altogether. It was betrayal by attrition. Sponsors began to withdraw. One high-profile donor, rumored to be tied to a royal cousin, cancelled a $2 million pledge citing uncertain affiliations. The Sussex's Montecito circle shrank. Celebrity backers who once praised Invictus in interviews now went radio silent. The betrayal stung deeper when Harry's close friend and former royal equerry, Mark Dyer, issued a statement reaffirming his full loyalty to the crown and its sovereign. Meghan was furious, urging Harry to fight fire with fire, to expose the hypocrisy. But Harry was torn. His battle had started as a defense of his ideals. Now it felt like a siege against everything he once loved. On the day of the official birthday honors list, King Charles appeared in public draped in his field marshal uniform, flanked by loyal royal members. The message was visual. This was a family of discipline, not dissent. When asked about the Invictus Games during a press moment, Charles issued a chilling reply. The crown does not reward defiance. That is the realm of others. He didn't need to name Harry. The statement went viral. Just as the monarchy seemed to have cut Harry off entirely, a surprising voice emerged. Lady Sarah Chatto, daughter of Princess Margaret. In a rare social media post, she praised Invictus and its role in healing veterans worldwide. Though she did not attend the games, her subtle rebellion reignited whispers within the aristocracy. Was the king overreaching? Was the crown strangling its own in the name of order? Despite the onslaught, the games began. The opening ceremony in Dusseldorf was smaller than previous years. Fewer royals, fewer celebrities. But the spirit was defiant. Harry stood on stage, eyes rimmed red, as the anthem played. He gave a speech that was less about unity, more about resistance. This isn't just about wounded warriors. This is about truth, about standing tall when even your family tries to make you small. We don't serve crowns, we serve courage. The audience roared. But back in Britain, the palace was already drafting consequences. Weeks after the games concluded, a letter arrived via courier at the Sussex estate. It bore the same seal as before, but this time it was addressed to Harry personally. The message was brief. As of this day, by order of His Majesty the Duke of Sussex shall no longer be considered an active member of the royal house. All representations of crown affiliation must be removed from all engagements. Continued use shall constitute misrepresentation. It was exile in writing, and this time there would be no return. The fallout left the world divided. Some praised King Charles for preserving order and unity. Others wept for a family torn apart, a prince who bled for service only to be silenced for his independence. In the end, Harry stood alone but not without honor. And though the palace reclaimed its walls and its warriors, it couldn't erase the roar of the Invictus crowd, echoing across a world still watching. Even in exile, Harry had made his stand. But at what cost? The silence at Buckingham Palace was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the antique mantel clock, its deliberate pace echoing the tension that had wrapped the royal family in a cold grip. It had been nearly a week since King Charles issued his earth-shattering ultimatum. Now, the consequences of that royal decree were settling like dust after a battlefield clash, yet the storm, it seemed, had only just begun to howl. Back in California, Harry sat on the patio of his Montecito home, staring blankly at the rolling hills that lay beyond the estate's manicured gardens. The Invictus Games had ended, the applause had faded, the cameras were gone. And though the veterans had showered him with gratitude, there was a deafening absence in his heart. His family. Meghan, perched at the other end of the veranda with her tablet glowing in her hands, scrolled through the headlines with a faint sneer. Palace lays down the law. Royals who break rank will be silently removed. Another read. William rises as defender of the crown amid Harry's Invictus challenge. She looked up. They're rewriting everything, making William into the saint. Harry didn't respond. In the weeks since the games, even close friends had grown distant. Texts went unanswered. Beatrice and Eugenie, once bridges between the Sussexes and the firm, had gone silent. Not out of malice, Harry suspected, but fear. His father's edict was a noose, and no one dared test its length. And then came the summons, not from King Charles but from Prince William himself. A message delivered through a mutual friend, sent with a sort of formal stiffness that left no room for misinterpretation. You need to come to London, alone. The atmosphere at Kensington Palace was no less tense than that of Buckingham. William stood at the window of his private study, hands folded behind his back, watching the leaves blow across the palace gardens. It was a rare moment of stillness for the heir to the throne, now burdened not only with his father's declining health but with the increasingly visible fractures within the monarchy itself. He's not coming back into the fold, Catherine had said the night before as they lay in bed, her voice heavy with resignation. But you still have to try. For the institution. For your father. So, William had agreed. But this meeting was not about reconciliation. It was about clarity. When Harry arrived unescorted, no press, no Meghan, the brothers exchanged only a curt nod. The cold marble of the palace corridor stretched between them like a chasm of old wounds. William led Harry into the study. The door closed with a final sounding thud. Let me be direct, William began, wasting no time. This game's stunt of yours, it was your choice. But what you've done, what you're doing, it's undermining everything we're trying to rebuild. Harry crossed his arms. The games are about veterans, not the crown. You've all twisted it into something it's not. You made it political the moment you weaponized your exile, William shot back. You think you're fighting for justice, Harry, but you're really just burning bridges and dragging others down with you. The room felt like it was shrinking. And what about loyalty? Harry asked, voice rising. I gave everything, my military career, my mental health. And the moment I said something you didn't like, you said more than something. Harry, William interrupted you, declared war. The word hung there, ominous. That night, King Charles met privately with Princess Anne at Sandringham. The fire crackled in the hearth as Anne poured 2 glasses of whiskey, setting one in front of her brother. He's lost, Anne, Charles muttered. But the monarchy cannot afford to follow him. Anne sighed. He's not just lost. He's angry, and when he's angry he fights. Then we prepare, Charles said. His tone hardened. This may be the last time we handle this behind closed doors. If he chooses public confrontation, so be it. We meet him there. It was an ominous pivot. The gloves were coming off 2 weeks later. The Daily Telegraph published an exclusive story. King Charles orders removal of Sussex. Arms from St. George's Chapel Memorial. The royal insignia for Harry and Meghan was quietly removed from its place beside the family crest, replaced by a simple gold shield bearing no name. It was a quiet, brutal rebuke. Shortly after, a second bombshell exploded across headlines worldwide. Prince Harry to launch Global Veterans Initiative without royal endorsement backed by U.S. military officials. The initiative, tentatively titled Valor Rising, aimed to create a global platform for veterans, independent of royal influence. Already celebrities and international sponsors were lining up. The palace issued no statement, but behind the scenes, royal advisors were in crisis mode. He's building a shadow institution, one senior aide warned. And worse, he's succeeding. The Queen Consort Camilla was reportedly furious. He's turning this into an alternative throne, she snapped at Charles during a tense dinner. You need to act, if not for your legacy, for William's. But Charles, visibly older and wearied by the stress, merely replied, I've given my warning. What happens now is on him. Yet, another line had been drawn. The next move belonged to Harry. In Montecito, Meghan watched the growing firestorm with something close to triumph. While Harry still mourned the loss of family, she saw opportunity. They've rejected you, she said, but the world hasn't. This is your moment to lead, to be something more than the spare. Harry looked at her, torn between ambition and sorrow. But at what cost? He asked. She didn't answer. An anonymous source leaked internal palace memos revealing that a proposal had been raised quietly, tentatively to officially revoke the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's titles. The headlines were volcanic, exiled for good. Royal family considers stripping Sussexes of titles in response. Harry called an emergency press conference. Standing before a sea of reporters, Harry addressed the world directly. If they want to strip our titles, let them. Titles don't make a man, service does, and I will never stop serving. The crowd erupted, and in Buckingham Palace the king turned to his advisors and said the unthinkable. It may be time to close the gates. The echoes of King Charles's ultimatum had barely faded when the world turned its gaze to a grand stage set in Sydney, Australia. Against all odds and mounting pressure from the monarchy, Prince Harry strode confidently into the spotlight to inaugurate the newest chapter of the Invictus Games. Cheering crowds lined the venue as athletes from across the globe gathered in a show of resilience and unity, despite the looming threat of exile. But the deeper truth, masked behind the flashing cameras and smiling faces, was far more complex. That Prince Harry's personal plea to various governments and international dignitaries had landed him several surprising allies. Australia's Prime Minister, emboldened by a populist wave, declared full support for the Games and issued a statement defending Harry's efforts to highlight the mental health and well-being of veterans. France, Germany, and even South Africa released diplomatic communiques condemning what they delicately referred to as royal overreach. Back at Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was grim. King Charles, seated at the head of a darkened briefing room, reviewed media coverage alongside senior advisors. The headlines were brutal. Harry defies father's edict with heroic show of unity. Public opinion tilts towards Sussex in explosive royal fallout. And most painfully, the People's Prince returns. Camilla, red-eyed with fury, broke the silence. This is a coordinated media assault. He's made fools of us, and if no one is punished, then the crown loses its final shred of authority. Prince William's expression was unreadable. Ever the tactician, he understood the undercurrents. Harry's boldness had garnered public sympathy, especially among younger generations. Yet any official punishment could provoke backlash. Painting the monarchy as vindictive, Princess Anne, who had remained quiet for much of the meeting, finally spoke. The moment we make this a legal matter, we confirm the crown has no control outside its gates. If Harry succeeds with Invictus despite our warning, then our influence is diminished. But if we attempt to punish those who participate, we will face open rebellion from Commonwealth partners. The room fell into silence. For the first time, It became clear that the ultimatum, once thought to be a line in the sand, might have emboldened Harry instead of deterring him. Meanwhile, in Sydney, Meghan Markle was coordinating press interviews from the sidelines. Despite staying mostly behind the scenes, she made one surprise appearance in front of reporters. Her words were calculated. The Invictus Games have never been about politics or division. They are about healing. If that offends some, so be it. But Harry and I will continue this mission no matter the cost. The message was unmistakable. Meghan, often blamed for encouraging Harry's estrangement, was now openly defying the monarchy's edict. And she wasn't alone. News soon broke that several minor royals had sent private messages of encouragement to Harry. Lady Amelia Windsor posted a cryptic photo of herself wearing an Invictus shirt, while Lord Frederick Windsor's wife, Sophie Winkleman, was spotted boarding a flight to Sydney. The leak from Heathrow Airport, though swiftly denied, confirmed what many suspected: the House of Windsor was fracturing. Panic spread among the senior royals. Charles summoned his inner circle once more, this time issuing a secondary decree behind closed doors. All royal family members, even extended branches, were forbidden from making contact with Harry or Meghan. Anyone defying this rule would face financial exile. No stipends, no support, no security. But such a move could not be contained. Within 24 hours, media outlets caught wind of the internal family crackdown. Hashtags like #FreeTheWindsors and #StandWithHarry trended globally. Opinion polls commissioned by major UK newspapers showed a steep drop in the monarchy's approval rating, especially among younger voters. Public discourse became a powder keg amid the chaos. Prince Harry delivered the keynote speech at the Games, standing tall before a roaring audience. He did not mention his father or the royal family by name. Instead, he told stories of wounded soldiers who found new purpose, of families reunited, and of love overcoming bitterness. But then he paused. No institution, no matter how old, no matter how revered, can stand in the way of healing. Not when the stakes are life and death. Not when veterans are counting on us to do the right thing. The audience erupted into cheers. Back in London, Charles turned off the television. "He's forcing my hand," the king muttered. Camilla nodded grimly. "Then, we must respond with finality. Strip the titles publicly, immediately." Princess Anne rose. "You'll be sealing the crown's fate, but you won't listen, not until it's too late." With that, she left the room. Later that night, an emergency announcement was posted to the official royal family website. In cold, formal language, it declared that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle would no longer be referred to as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Their children, Archie and Lilibet, would be styled as private citizens. All financial privileges extended to them through crown estates would be permanently revoked. The response was swift and cataclysmic. Thousands gathered outside Windsor Castle in protest. Former royal staffers began leaking stories to the press about how Charles had ignored Meghan's early requests for mental health support. Veterans groups in the US and Canada called for sanctions against British royal charities. And in the middle of it all, Harry sat quietly with Meghan in a modest hotel suite overlooking the Sydney harbour. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated their tired faces as they watched the backlash unfold. "They made it public," Meghan whispered. Harry nodded. "That was the plan. Push me far enough to make an example. But it's not over. Not by a long shot." He picked up the phone and dialed a secure number. "Set up the press conference. Tomorrow we're going to answer back." Buckingham Palace loomed in a storm of silence as dusk fell across London. Behind its gilded gates, the weight of centuries of power, tradition, and secrecy pressed down on its occupants like a lead shroud. At the epicenter of this royal tempest stood King Charles III, aged not just by time, but by months of mounting pressure, betrayal, and relentless media scrutiny. The ultimatum he had issued regarding the Invictus Games was no idle threat. Those who dared to align themselves with Prince Harry, whether through public endorsement or whispered encouragement, now faced swift ostracization. Several military officials were quietly reassigned, diplomatic contacts chilled, and funding pipelines froze without explanation. The royal decree had become more than a private vendetta. It was a reassertion of monarchical dominance in a modern world where the firm could no longer afford to bleed authority. Inside a candlelit drawing room of Sandringham, Princess Anne sat with her arms crossed. Her face, as firm as the creases in her military jacket, betrayed little emotion. But those closest to her knew the truth. She was torn. While fiercely loyal to the institution, Anne had always harbored a subtle respect for Harry's grit, the same grit that reminded her of Diana. Now she watched as her brother declared war on his own son, and the consequences were becoming irreversible. Camilla, however, took a more visceral stance. At a private engagement at Windsor, she had been overheard dismissing Harry as a man-child clinging to relevance, warning a group of aristocratic supporters that anyone attending the Invictus Games would be labeled an enemy of the crown. That off-the-cuff remark would later leak, triggering a global backlash. In California, Harry and Meghan huddled in the Santa Barbara mansion they once proudly flaunted. It was no longer the fortress of glamour it had been. Behind the high walls, Harry sat pale and exhausted, staring out at the sea. "He's trying to erase me," Harry whispered to Meghan. To rewrite history. Meghan, with her arms around his shoulders, replied firmly. Then we rewrite it louder. Their next move was unprecedented. They announced a full-scale international media tour. Oprah, Anderson Cooper, BBC Panorama, even Netflix returned to renegotiate terms for a second docuseries, this one darker, grittier, titled The Spares War. It would cover the timeline from Harry's royal exit to the recent threats and global implications of the king's wrath. The royal household scrambled. Legal teams drafted contingency statements. MI5 increased internal surveillance. MI6 quietly monitoring threats abroad, flagged disturbing chatter from rogue supporters who had begun targeting royal events, declaring solidarity with Harry's cause. Public reaction fractured in Britain. Polls showed a dramatic generational split. Younger citizens, many disillusioned with monarchical elitism, stood by Harry. Older generations, however, rallied around Charles and William, portraying Harry as a traitor who sold family secrets for a Netflix paycheck. The situation reached a fever pitch when Canada, traditionally a strong ally of the monarchy, announced that Prime Minister Renee Gauthier would attend the Invictus Games in full capacity. Prince Harry's dedication to veterans transcends family squabbles, she said in a global press conference. That broke the dam. France and Germany followed. Even the U.S. Department of Defense sent high-ranking officials. The message was clear. Harry, in their eyes, was a statesman for a wounded world, not a royal embarrassment. This enraged Charles. On a rain-lashed evening in July, the king summoned a secret meeting inside Windsor Castle. Attendees included William, Camilla, Anne, and Lord Chamberlain Percival Darlington. The room buzzed with fury. He is using Invictus to stage a coup of public opinion, Camilla hissed. William leaned forward, more subdued. We made this worse. By trying to silence him now, we've turned him into a martyr. Charles pounded the table. I am still the king, and I will not watch this institution rot from within. But behind his declaration, fear was creeping in. For the first time, the monarchy had lost control of the narrative. Then came the final blow. An anonymous palace insider leaked a trove of communications to the press. Emails and voice notes showing that months before issuing the ultimatum, Charles had been working with foreign dignitaries and military leaders to sideline Harry from all royal-related international efforts, including Veterans Affairs. The exposé was published by The Guardian under the headline, The King's Shadow War. Sentiment exploded. Protests ignited outside Parliament. The hashtag Stand With Harry trended worldwide. Veterans who had once sworn allegiance to the crown now marched under banners of the Sussex crest. And then, just as the monarchy stood at its most vulnerable, Harry returned unannounced under the cloak of night. He arrived in London. Disguised in a black hoodie, he walked the cobbled alleyways near Kensington Palace, his eyes fixed on the golden lights of his childhood home. The following morning he held a press conference outside the Royal Albert Hall. Cameras clicked. The world held its breath. I did not return to destroy the monarchy, Harry began, voice steady. I returned to save it from itself. He spoke of the power of transparency, of reconciling history's pain, of reimagining royal service not as a privilege but as a duty to humanity. And finally he addressed his father. To my father, King Charles, I forgive you. I understand your fear, but fear cannot govern a nation. Love must. 4 minutes after he stepped down, the crowd was silent. Then came a slow, swelling applause. The wind had shifted. Inside Buckingham Palace, Charles stood watching on a hidden feed. His hands trembled. Camilla sat beside him, stone-faced. William, watching from Sandringham, turned away with tears in his eyes. Princess Anne, however, placed a hand over her heart. Diana would be proud, she murmured. In the days that followed, the Queen Consort quietly withdrew from public life. The statement said it was for health reasons, but insiders confirmed the pressure had mounted unbearably. Charles, faced with the edge of a constitutional crisis, held emergency talks with Prime Minister Louise Chamberlain. A compromise was forged. Harry would be reinstated to select charitable duties, especially those tied to veterans and mental health. He would not hold formal royal titles, but would be recognized as a royal ambassador. In exchange, the Invictus Games would be protected as a neutral international institution. The exile edict was rescinded. The final act came during a quiet ceremony at Windsor Gardens. King Charles, frail but resolute, stepped forward with a velvet box. Inside, a golden medallion bearing the image of St. George for service beyond duty. The king whispered, handing it to his son. Harry bowed, not to a king but to a father. The royal family, though fractured, had reached a ceasefire, not quite healing but no longer bleeding. And as the Union Jack fluttered above the palace, its threads strained but unbroken, Britain witnessed something it had not seen in a long time.